Breaking. Matteo Collina, Node.js, Fastify guy, very serious person, dropped a 19,000 line PR on Node Core over Christmas with Claude. The Node.js community lost its mind. Someone started a petition. Matteo's response was basically, I made all the decisions. I fixed the AI's mistakes, and it's still my code. And here's our very own version of Matteo to break it down for you. Matt, what does this mean?
Oh boy, Scott. Yeah, I feel like that one could say that this is like the Node community falling apart about this. I think really they're just like facing the same existential question that every open source community is facing at the moment, where more and more people are getting access to agents to write code for them, and that sort of leaves a big open question of like, what does that mean for the copyright of the code being generated? Um, I don't have, I haven't done that much research into like larger decisions here in terms of like, has, for example, any courts within the U.S. made any rulings on how like agent code is impacting licensing or not? But I think it's an interesting question. So let's dig into like what specifically we're talking about. Like, what's this example? If you haven't been following, for those that don't know, Node.js, popular JavaScript runtime, used for like server side loads and other things like that. Um, one of their contributors, like Scott was saying, is opened up this large PR, and it's like a pretty pretty large PR. It's like difficult to load in GitHub. It's difficult to see the diff. And the author openly stated that they used Claude Code to write a majority of it. And they just sort of like guided it down the right path. And the PR itself is adding support for what they call a virtual file system, which is kind of cool. I think it's been maybe a long requested feature in Node. I think it's especially more important as you start talking about like, can Node be used by agents to do work like in virtual sort of modules or virtual file system setup? So I think that's an interesting sort of second AI aspect of this. But yeah, they opened this PR, and one of the contributors to Node was basically like, this seems a little bit sus. Like, is this meeting our contributor guidelines or contributor requirements for Node? In which they have like a thing called a DCO, which I don't know how popular this is. Maybe other open source things use this as well, but it's a developer's certificate of origin. Basically, it's a way to say like the author of some change to the open source library has attributed that like either they wrote the code themselves or they have the license, and the license is valid for open source usage for the code, like if someone else wrote it. And so it's a bit foggy on does code that Claude generates or Codex generates, et cetera, like does this adhere to the DCO? I think that's still just sort of an open question, I guess. Anyway, yeah, this PR is getting very noisy. This contributor that sort of raised that flag started a petition to say that they shouldn't allow AI generated code within Node.js core, which is interesting. It's like I think there's a lot of potential outcomes if that thing ends up becoming the case.
Is this really the first time someone's used AI to contribute to Node.js, or is it just the size of the change?
Yeah, it's the first obvious time. It's so big. It's like clearly this person just whipped it up. Also, I tried to run through the commits, and man, I don't know what's going on there. So that's not helping his case.
Yeah, also it's just like if you're generating this much code. Sorry, go ahead, Scott. I lost my point.
All right, well, I didn't have anything to say, but I was reading I was reading the PR, and it does say like this PR is massive because the goal is to intercept all of file system and file system promise methods, as well as the module loading system. This involves 164 plus interception points inside existing Node.js functions. So, and then he's got some numbers here. I mean, there is a lot of test coverage and whatnot, but basically he's saying that it needs to be huge, which is maybe not true, right? I think we recently talked about how incremental approach could be done here in a safe way. But I mean, it's even more of a smell that I guess maybe not a smell, but more so just that like it's clear that he was working on this like crazy with his AI. It was like, oh, it works, and then he just tossed it up. So part of me thinks like as a developer, who's built big PRs before, you should have some awareness how this might like go, and especially in the open source community. Not trying to rag on them, but more so just saying like, hey, like if you want to do this thing, you need to generate some buy-in and maybe talk about the approach with some of the maintainers or look at their guidelines before you do this. Just kind of my initial thoughts.
Yeah, I definitely think the size of the PR is a contributing factor to this discussion, um, for a number of reasons. I think Dylan, that your like initial thought of like, is this the first case? Probably not, right? But it's also likely that previous contributions either, yeah, were like small enough that they sort of slid under the radar, or didn't explicitly call out that they were using like agents to help assist them. And then in this case, like in terms of the large PR, I think we've sort of seen the case where it's like agents have made it far easier for us to make large PRs potentially, in the sense of like they help like I think it's easier for them to just like jump to the end and like say, here's the full solution, like all in one go. um, and then in this case, I think that Matteo even noted that like, I think it was Matteo or someone else noted that like the amount of test cases added in this PR, which I think is like more than 50% of the PR is tests, which is pretty cool. um, but someone noted that it's like that would take a human like far too long to write them that many sort of different integration tests, or the human would like sort of opt to just like not add that much tests, in terms of like, like it might be covering every single condition, whereas like a human might say, oh, I only want to cover, I don't know, picking a number out of a hat, like 50% of my sort of like surface area, for example, just because of the amount of code required to set up all the tests and get them working as expected. Um, so I think that's like, those are maybe kind of interesting aspects here.
Yeah, I also think that like kind of going through the PR a bit, there's a lot of concern about that. They collected a lot of I guess concerns about doing something like this in the future in the past, and a lot of those were overlooked. And this is more so like this was probably it's coming up that this was like just a problem for the person, and they were like, I'm gonna solve it. And some upfront communication could really have help garner some support, right? Like basically, if he wanted to do this, he should have been a little bit more open. Maybe created an issue and said that he was like looking to solve it and get feedback from folks, create some buy-in. It seems like there is like some preliminary reviews on this PR. It is clear that some of the things were done by Claude and a little bit overlooked, like when Claude likes to, I don't know, import statements or require statements in the middle of a file, which it'll occasionally do. That's a good indicator. But also just like um, there seems to be other concerns from folks that could be a part of this PR. And by just like doing it all in one, it's like the shock factor that like people are just like shocked by, oh my God, this is here now, but they don't have a say. So just like generating that level of support for the feature. And I mean, I can't blame him because a lot of us as engineers, like we start writing a doc about a problem and they're like, I just want to solve it, right? Because that's kind of our job. But sometimes you need to take your foot off the gas a little bit so you need to walk before you can run, I guess, is a way to put it.
Yeah, this is such a huge change. Like, did they not know this was coming? Was there not talks like, hey, I'm going to build a virtual file system feature.
Looks
Here's here,
blindsided.
here's a tech plan.
It sounds like that like this is something that had been talked about in the past, but he kind of just brought it out of the blue, and I'm gonna look into confirm whether or not that is true.
think Yeah, I think there were already issues discussing this. I don't know if like Matteo had Claude create a plan, for example, and then shared that plan to get feedback. I also don't have a good understanding of like, how do node features get contributed usually. Like, I don't know if there's that much collaboration in terms of the all the different contributors are sort of talking about a plan and then they go to implement, versus like being sort of like independently driven, in terms of like an individual contributor might pick up an issue and say, I'm just going to tackle this all the way to opening the PR. Like, I don't know if there's like earlier stages of review that happens at. um, I would be surprised if there is.
The thing that's sticking out to me here is like, how are we going to police this? The same problem with like colleges or like schools trying to say like, oh, you used AI to write your paper, and then they use these tools to detect if it's AI or not, and it's giving you false positives. So like, yeah, how do we deal with this?
I just want to call out quickly, just to circle back. I did just look it up. So basically, it looks like Matteo didn't go through like the normal RC like issue protocol that they do on the repo, but something he did do is publicly write a blog post that this was a feature that was needed. So he kind of pled the case for it, but also didn't maybe plead it directly to the people who would be looking at it or using their basically using their standards.
How can we actually police this? Because I feel like this is just going to give people a warning of like, hey, just don't like have Claude vibe the entire thing. Maybe like have it write all the code over here, and then you just like slowly copy it over manually. Like you're gonna just develop some other process to make it less all Claude and more you. Because people are using like, are you just gonna take it out of your research as well? Like, because then it's writing the code for you. It's putting it in your mind, and then you're putting it on paper. So like, what's the difference?
Yeah, there's this like separate issue that I think was sort of actually started almost a year ago, um, by Matteo about asking if AI assisted development is allowed there's like a cross project council repo, which I assume is sort of like a collection of people across different open source projects that operate within the OpenJS Foundation. And in that, like, there's a few contributors, like other Node contributors as well, talking about it and sort of noting that like maybe it shouldn't be allowed because of uncertainties. I think I think part of that discussion also goes into like, if you ban it, it's also going to be hard to know if someone is using it or not. Um, like you can't really tell in all cases. Like sometimes you can find the slop, right? But sometimes you can't. Like even like a one-line bug fix might be really concrete and concise and like straight to the point, and it might be very hard to identify if that was written by an agent or a human. Um, I think that's an interesting, maybe it's like sort of a slippery slope maybe, or I don't know the right sort of framing, but it's like maybe that makes you just say like we should allow AI assisted development in these projects.
I also want to just like to conclude and follow up on like my take here of just like he just kind of pushed it through. Like one could also argue that maybe he thought it was easier using AI to basically ask for forgiveness than permission to do it, where he could just like show, hey, look, this can be achieved, and then get it reviewed and bullishly push it through, then creating a proposal and then a lot of back and forth that could get bike shedding Bike Shed podcast, and it might have like I don't know died, or he had the time over Christmas break. Maybe like this conversation is a year-long conversation, and he loses the burning desire to do it. So there are other like motives and drives. So he just was like, "Hey, I'm gonna yeet this into a PR. We're gonna see what happens, and it's better than having nothing." So just want to see like maybe that's his take here.
Yeah, I think he also at the same time of opening this PR, I think he also published like a a polyfill sort of package on npm for very similar features or functionality. Um, maybe he sort of realized like it'll take a while for this to actually, if it lands in Node, it'll take a while for it to land in Node. And so it's like easy enough to just publish some user space uh, solution that offers similar functionality.
Maybe he's galaxy brain, and like there was a separate motive for this, is just to like shock people, and then get the Node.js team to put in better guidelines and governance for this kind of thing.
Maybe he just wants to move the AI question forward. Like, let us do it. Let's iterate on this sucker.
Let's actually figure out the gray area, because we're gonna have to. We need to do it now.
That could be possible. I feel like that's like the case where it's like the simplest reason is the most likely reason here, and I feel like it's just like he just wants this functionality in Node, and the fastest way to get that functionality in Node was like, hey, Claude's pretty good at writing code. Like, let's use it to write code for us to get this functionality in.
The fastest way to get something you want is to do it yourself, right? So
Yeah.
I mean, why doesn't it just fork Node and call it Canode or something?
virtual node.
Claude.
Input output JS was the joke I tweeted, saying that who's going to Slopfork Node and name it input output. For those that don't get the joke there, it's like there was a time in Node's early life where someone did fork it, called it IO.js, and then sort of led to a very like Python 2.3 kind of situation where you have like sort of two competing runtimes.
Is that like Isaac Schluter or something? Like that guy? One of like the core maintainers a long time ago.
He was primarily on the npm side. I don't know if he did IO.js. I'm
Okay.
a little bit rusty on the details there, but
All good. That was like 15 years ago, probably. I feel like another part of this is he's changing a major part of Node.js. So like that's why people are like hold like slow down. Which I get. And like we've said, like Scott said earlier, there's how many commits? There's just too many. Like how do you reliably review this at all? Like it would take a month with like 20 subhumans or
Well, he's probably
agents.
forked it. He's probably forked it at his commit now.
Well, I shared a screenshot of a comment that was minimized on the PR that was one of the other contributors to Node had Claude do a sort of a deep dive review on the PR and then posted that review on the PR, which is sort of like ironic with the ongoing discussions going on.
You just have to make sure to have it do it from the perspective of someone who's anti-AI.
Yeah. One of the interesting side discussions, which maybe this is going down a tangent, that I had with some other people at work about this topic was if Node adopts this no AI contribution policy, I'm curious like how that might bolster Bun or Dino or potentially also like another fork of Node that are more willing to accept AI generated contributions. We've certainly seen Bun rise to popularity. I think it's like pretty like they've been leaning into using Claude, obviously, to help improve it or add new features to it. Dino's like maybe been a little bit quiet in terms of that aspect. But yeah, curious from your guys' perspective, like if Node says no to AI contributions, like what do you guys see the sort of the server JavaScript runtime space in 6 months to a year?
I don't think it's going to largely impact what people are using. To me, that's like, what are the large hosting providers like giving people? And maybe that's partly based on like what people are asking for. But like if I'm using Cloudflare or AWS with like Lambda functions, I don't know. I'm just trying to think of like what are companies using as the runtime for to like help you run your code. Because if Node.js is super embedded into those systems, I think it's going to be really slow for that adoption to switch over to something else if it's not already provided by those services. Maybe that's like a uninformed take, but that's just how I see it.
I'm gonna go down this path a little bit. I almost feel like corporations like haven't really, and maybe like we were a little bit more bullish when we worked together to try new things, but like the bigger a corporation is, I just feel like they're not as willing to like migrate to a new thing. Like React is like a great example of like every corporation is like, we got to do this. Um, some of these other things, like I don't see as much like drive, I guess, to get there. So like I'm not saying that this wouldn't happen. I think there needs to be like more of a value add. Um, so how that changes the landscape, I guess, like is the question. Is like I'm not 100% sure. Like I think it was getting me to this point of like I think that stability still is like really important. Like if you can still scale and you're not blocked, like something like Node might just be around as long as there's like not actual missing features that it can't keep up with. But if something like Bun starts to have more features that are like really ever apparent and more important, then I could see something kind of take over it. But like I do feel that we're not as eager in larger corporations to make bigger technical switches like this. With like something like maybe GraphQL, being like the last big thing that a lot of companies have done. I mean, basically, if some company like Facebook or Google's doing it, like companies might also catch on to the trend. But at startups that we've worked at, like I feel like you try everything, and whatever helps you solve the problem fastest is like the right approach.
I think that's accurate. I think it's sort of like I wonder if that's going to change. Like AI makes it a lot easier to move from one thing. Like there's like the sticking cost of these things is pretty low thanks to agents. Like it's relatively easy to say like, hey, like we're using Next.js, but like point your agent at TanStack start docs and like migrate me, and it could
Yeah.
do that.
AI is really good at being like, okay, this is our old thing, and now we need to move it to the new thing. That is like one of the best use cases. I think we've said that in previous episodes,
Yep.
but like point taken.
Yeah, and so I think it's like easy enough. I think there's other bureaucracy in the way, obviously, for larger companies, but I think it's easy enough to say like we're using Node today in production. Like point your agent at it and say like, hey, we use Node this way. Like update us to use Bun, right? And your agent could probably do that. I think I agree with you guys that it's like if that were the case, if Node decides to do this, and there's like sort of a slight shifting of the tides, it's going to take a very long time before that sort of plays out. I do think that like other runtimes would probably benefit from that change in the sense that Bun and Dino could lean into using AI to roll out better features, improve those runtimes even faster than what Node could do. I mean, a classic example that maybe a lot of people talk about over the past year or so is like Node.js got native SQLite support. And a lot of people said, oh, like they added this because Bun added it, right? But like in reality, like Node.js was working on it for a while, but it just took them so long to iterate on it that Bun was like, I don't know, like they probably announced it on Twitter saying, oh, we're adding SQLite support in the next version. And then a month later it was out, right? And so like that could also be attributed to like Bun is just a smaller team, so it's easier for them to make changes and iterate. But I just think like with how slow Node.js development usually is, it feels like it would that like the slowness and no AI. I feel like just compounds a little bit for them in terms of being a runtime as like being competitive in this runtime space. But again, like we're sort of going down the hypothetical of if they land on this, that issue that we had noted about like this sort of is AI assisted development allowed? It seems like it was closed a week ago, saying that consensus is that it is allowed for these open source projects in the sense that it doesn't it doesn't harm or like go against the existing licenses or the sort of contributing guidelines that they have. But Node could still make that decision just for the node itself, for example.
Also, like to just some of your to dig in on some of your points about Bun versus Node, like Bun's like actually like a company, and Node is like a committee, and Node is way more enforceful on backwards compatibility. I don't know about Buns, but I assume Bun just like they try to get you to upgrade to the latest and greatest every time because they're always pushing out new incentives and features. So um, also Bun owns like the whole stack, right? So that I think there's a little bit more I guess autonomy first off, you understand how things work really well, but there's more autonomy to like make decisions and move along the way, whereas like Node has to work compatibly with other things. So there's just like overall like a different structure, and this almost gets into the whole like should your project always be like a company, or like is open source going to get crushed because like now anyone can use AI? Like should open source lean in more heavily? Like this is the irony of the whole conversation. Should open source lean in more on AI because they can't keep up sometimes with some of these other products, and it's like a way for them to do that. So I just thought it was really interesting what you're saying, Matt.
Cool. Yeah, I think we've sort of covered the primary drama here.
What about the secondary drama?
I don't know if there is secondary drama. I mean, I guess the secondary continuous drama is that there's some interesting characters in the Node.js contributor community, which I think Probably difficult to talk about in a podcast, but
Matt's hot takes on
yeah,
contributors who are
yeah,
causing
exactly.
problems.
Yeah.
This isn't the first like AI issue we've seen in or like related thing in open source. Like this kind of feels like sort of similar to the things we've seen with, was it vNext in the past? I don't know if we talked about that already.
Yeah, I don't think we did cover the Cloudflare Slopfork of Next.js.
But I feel like we're going to start to see more of that. And in maybe in cases like this where somebody gets blocked by like they wanted this really specific change and then they're like, I'm going to go to Bun, like maybe what Matt was saying, and I'm going to implement VFS and they're going to accept it. And so now I use this.
Yeah.
And then sort of along the lines of what Matt was saying is are people going to shift to those different platforms? I think if the stability of Node.js starts to like go down because of AI or something, then maybe they would start to swap. Like if somebody merged this 17K line change and the next thing you know, there's just a bunch of new security vulnerabilities. Yeah, like, and it's just not as stable, then people start to question it more.
Maybe we spend a bit of time on the vNext drama. For those that don't know, the Cloudflare, but now sort of now being called a Slopfork, but they basically had AI write a version of Next.js that was based on Vite, the bundler, and it supported a decent number of the features that Next supports in terms of like RSC support with the app router and routing and things like that. They basically said, they told their agent, like, here's the test suite of Next.js, like write a framework using Vite that sort of passes these tests, right? And it led to a lot, I think, a lot of interesting conversations of like, is the test suite all you need to fork things efficiently to another language? And so like, maybe some interesting drama on Twitter in terms of like, oh, like I saw like the contributors or the creators of TL Draw saying like, oh, we're going to like close source our test suite to prevent people from forking the Canvas implementation from TL Draw.
Doesn't some other packages do that though? I think I've heard of that. If you don't know off the top of your head, but
Yeah. But a very popular example is SQLite itself. The code for, as I understand it, the code for SQLite is open source, but the test suite or certain test suites, I think they have like a number of different tests set up for SQLite. So like I think certain ones of those are closed source, and you can pay to have access to the test suite, which is kind of an interesting paradigm. I don't think we've seen adopted anywhere else, but you basically say like, hey, I want to invest in SQLite development, but I also want to have access to the test suite to make sure it covers all my cases for how I use SQLite, for example. So yeah, I think that's probably the most popular example I can think of where they have done that.
yeah, that feels like something that we might start to see more because of this sort of thing.
Yeah.
In terms of the vNext drama, just like preventing creating copies through like agent development. And then using loop, like I don't know if you know about this other thing. There's like a loophole of like how you can use agents to like break out of licenses, but maybe we save that for another episode.
Yeah, that could be interesting to dig into. I haven't seen that much of it. Of like, I assume it's just you point it at something and say rewrite this in a way that allows me to use it with a looser license or something.
Yeah, it's something like using multiple agents to like basically create a loophole around the law for the actual license itself. But I don't remember the specifics, so we don't have to get into it.
For the vNext drama, I think there actually the syntax episodes that covered it was pretty good in terms of going into depth of like how the person at Cloudflare that approached the development, which is I would recommend listening to. I think it led to a lot of interesting discussion in the ecosystem also. And also maybe popularized the term Slopfork, which I have now been using sort of almost everywhere.
Especially while eating.
Yeah. All right. Should we call it there? Do we have any other hot takes on this?
Nope, the hot
Yeah,
takes have dried up.
merge it already. What's going on?
Yeah, Scott already went in and approved the PR. So Matteo should just merge it.
Couldn't approve. Could only comment. I
Damn.
said, can you rebase it down to a single commit, please? There are more
And then-
commits here than files touched.
You should have put knit, reduce this down to other PRs. Looks good to me.
Exactly.
Approved.
Knit colon.
Yeah. All right. Thanks everyone for tuning in this week. Remember to leave a review of the episode and the show on your favorite podcast network. We appreciate 12 Node.js contributors out of 5 the most. Remember, if your app doesn't let you do it, then it's a bug on their end and not on ours. Feel free to join the Bike Shed Community Discord server to connect with other folks in the tech ecosystem, share your thoughts with us and listeners. You can find a link to the server as well as all of our episodes, transcripts, episode summaries, random memes, etc. at bikeshedpod.com. That's bikeshedpod.com, all one word. If you enjoyed this episode or other episodes, please share it with your friends or other Node.js contributors. We need more listeners. See you maybe next week. Peace out.
All right.